All right, so in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. All right, good morning, everybody. So we're gonna continue now with Give Me a Word on page 102, the bottom of 102, Heladius. And so it starts out by telling us saying how Abba Heladios was someone who was so intense in his prayer and in his focus on the spiritual life that he didn't look he never lifted up his eyes to see the roof of the church. And so this is something um, it's hard for us to grasp this kind of intensity over such a long period of just years and years. But for these people, it just sort of indicative of how otherworldly they were, and how their mind was so much on things above that they just couldn't tear themselves away. And it's interesting how when Saint Silouan talks about he has an imaginary sort of dialogue between Adam, now who's now in paradise, and himself who's down on earth. And so he's saying, oh, Father Adam, please pray for us, tell us what's the way to paradise. And then Adam says back to him, oh, my children, I love you, but please don't bother me. I'm just so overwhelmed with seeing the glory of God up here in heaven. I can't tear my eyes away. Just follow his commandments and leave me alone. So anyway, so this is the kind of intensity that they had, and it's this, but of course it's great to if you're already at that intensity. But the question is, well, how do you get there? And one of the things that we know in general about the spiritual life is this idea of you fake it till you make it. In other words, you try to behave in such a way that would be conducive, that you ask yourself, okay, well, if I were a person with intense prayer, how would I be living my life? Say, oh, I would do this and this. Or you can do this with really all the virtues. Say, if I were a person who were free from anger, what would I do when this person at work did this and this to me? Oh, well, I would just do that. And then what ends up happening is that by behaving in the way that you're hoping to become one day, it actually speeds up the process, and it becomes second nature. It becomes natural. And so that's why I remember when I was at Mount Athos, when I was a novice, I was helping out one of the monks at Simonos Petras, and 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 this was in the 90s, and of course there are airplanes flying over now and then, and once an airplane flew over the monastery, and I was sort of curiously looking at, oh, and then the monk who was in charge of me, he said, you know what a real virtue is? And what? Not looking at the airplanes when they fly over. Of course I got what he was getting at, because of course it's not a sin to look at an airplane flying over, but it is something that if a person's in a very good state of prayer and really focused on the spiritual life, on their either on their prayer or just on their sort of contemplation of spiritual things, they wouldn't have time for just like, oh, I wonder if that, just sort of, yeah, distractions, yeah. So yeah, so that there is something we can even take home, take away from this. Okay, so now on the top of 103, Haladios number 2, this is a very interesting quote from him. It's sort of a backwards approach to things. Good morning. So here we have the incident where Saint Abba Hiladius, he was someone who was so much into fasting and struggling hard and doing extra, that when it was time for Pascha, for Easter, he said to himself, so this father, he would only eat bread and salt all year round, just a very limited diet. But then when Easter came around, it says he would say to himself, oh, the brothers now are eating bread and salt, and I had to make a little effort for Easter. And since I eat sitting down on the other days, not Easter, now that it's Easter, I'll make an effort and eat standing up. And so, of course, it's very interesting to see this kind of mindset, because this really is very different from how we would think of Easter or any feast day. Well, the way we would think of Easter and feast day is, oh, now it's a feast day. Now I can just sort of relax, bring out the wine and just sort of lie around and entertain myself, and whereas he had this other view where this is a very holy day. There's a special day. I should do something extra for God, extra out of, and so this sort of just shows how these people were thinking, that they saw the spiritual struggle as not something that was imposed on them that they had to do, but they saw it as something that, oh, there's an opportunity for me to do something for God and show my gratitude, and so yeah, so that's what that is there. Okay, and yeah, so then now moving on to Evagrios. Now there's the next two pages have sayings from Evagrios. And as it mentions here in this brief biography, he was someone who was later condemned for his Origenism. In other words, what happened was there was in the 3rd century there was a very wise Christian teacher called Origen, and he was someone who taught that, well, he had many very wonderful insights into the spiritual life and commenting on scriptures and everything, but he also had some views that were actually heresies. Like he had this thing called the apokatastasis. In other words, he believed that since God is love, that in the end God will save everyone, even the demons. Everyone will go be saved in the end. Whereas this teaching really isn't in line. I mean, of course, there are some shades of opinion in this, but it's generally condemned as a heresy in the church. And Evagrius also was in line with this and a couple other things, and so that's why he was sort of like he's the bad guy. He's the person who has all these heresies. We have to not pay attention to him. But the interesting thing is that things really aren't so black and white in the Orthodox Church and in real life in general, because this Evagrios, he was someone who was tremendously he was a real struggler. He was in very intense prayer and even had great progress in prayer. And he was someone who he was even, as it says in his life here, was he ordained by he was ordained a deacon by Saint Basil the Great, and then a priest by Saint Gregory the theologian, and he was someone who had a profound effect, as it says, on many of the great fathers of the church. So what this goes to show is that even if there is someone who's a heretic, who the church condemns as a heretic, there can still be, some real gems in there. And so what these sayings are that were preserved are some of these gems that we can benefit from it and see his wisdom. So the very first saying here attributed to him, this is the one where he's explaining how we should behave in our cell. In other words, what we should do to keep our mind on things above. And so he goes into detail, and he says, you can remember, so top page 104 there, he says how you can imagine what's happening in Hades, in hell, and how there's the groaning and the worm that doesn't die, and the darkness and the gnashing of teeth. But then also on the flip side, he also says you can ponder what's happening in heaven right now, with the archangels and the angels and the gifts and the joy, the repose. And so by keeping these things in mind, we can be much more on track spiritually, and also more strong against any temptations. Because if you were just now, let's say you're just now thinking about, oh, how wonderful to be in paradise, I can't wait to get there, and then someone creates some sort of temptation for you, it's very unlikely that you'll just lash out in anger and say, hey, get out, whatever, so and this is also what Yaron Defrem would teach us. He said, if we examine all the times we've fallen into a sin, if we really examine what our thoughts were just before the temptation hit us and we gave into a sin, we'll always notice that our mind wasn't on spiritually. It wasn't praying. It wasn't meditating, heavenly things. It was on something very, mundane or earthly. And that's why Elder Ephraim would say to us that we should always, there's just two things we should do constantly. He said, theoria and echi. In other words, theoria would be contemplation. In other words, contemplating these things that Evagrius is talking about. And a he, is prayer, and specifically the Jesus prayer, because prayer, when the Holy Father is talking about prayer, they usually are referring not to just what we do, once a week and we go to church, but they're talking about something that's a continuous thing. We're constantly trying to keep our mind on prayer. We're constantly trying to say the Jesus prayer. And so this is why when we are saying the Jesus prayer in a continual way, it's much easier to resist temptations. So that's what Evagrius is talking about here. Because another thing that Elder Ephraim would tell us is, and this is something we also know from experience, is that our mind, it never stops. It's always going to be thinking about something. You can't stop it from thinking. So it's either going to be thinking of things that are going to be helpful or harmful. Of course, there are neutral things you can think about, just taking care of the daily things that you have to survive. But as much as we can, we need to focus on where our thoughts are going, because that's going to determine what kind of mood and state we're going to be in. Okay, and then now Evagrius number 3 on page 104, he says, "It is a great thing to pray without distraction, but greater still to sing without distraction." And so what he means by this is that if you're in church and you're not one of the people doing the singing, it's a great thing to be able to pray and not have your mind be thinking about other things other than what's being said in the church. But then if you're singing, and perhaps any of you who are singers in church might have experienced this also, how it's extremely difficult to be a chanter or a singer in the choir, just because there's so many technical things you have to keep in mind, like, okay, what scale is this in, and okay, what's the priest doing, how can I match the pitch, and this person's off key, and it is really hard to pray, and so it's yeah. Okay. Yeah, and then now at the bottom of 104, Evagrius number 5, this is one of Elder Ephraim's favorite sayings. He says, "Take away temptations and nobody is being saved," because it's the temptations, it's the challenges we have in life that really sort of get us going. It's when we don't have temptations that we should start to worry. In fact, have I told you about that story about St. Ambrose and the earthquake? I should tell you again. Anyway, it's worth hearing again. So what happened was St. Ambrose, way back in, I think it was 4th century, he was, so it was like 3rd or 4th century in Italy, Orthodox Italy. He was just walking down the road with his deacon, and he saw the house of this really rich person, this mansion. And he says to the deacon, "Hey, let's go and see who lives here." So they go into this mansion, the rich man's house, and the rich man gives them a lavish, welcome and everything. And so then the bishop says, so St. Ambrose, who's a bishop, says, so tell me, my man, have you ever had anything? I see you're obviously very, very wealthy, very well off to do. Have you ever had any difficulties in your life, any sorrows, any challenges? And the rich man said to him, "No, Your Grace. I've just had a very easy life. I've just, born to a rich family, and I inherited all this wealth. I've had it easy all my life." And as soon as the Saint Ambrose heard that, his face turned pale, and he said to his deacon, "Quick, we got to get out of here right away." And his deacon's like, "Yeah, but let me get you a little more snacks. So these are pretty good." But anyway, so they leave the mansion, and they don't walk even like half a mile, and all of a sudden there's an earthquake right where that mansion was. The whole place is destroyed, and everyone's killed in there. And the deacon's like, "Whoa, how'd you know there's going to be an earthquake there?" And St. Ambrose said, "Well, I didn't know that there's going to be an earthquake, but I could tell that God had given up on this person. He had abandoned him, and so because God had given up on him and abandoned him, there's no point in being there. This is beyond, trying to help this person, and so it's interesting how in the eyes of the saints, God's abandonment means you're having everything easy and a good life. because a lot of times we think of it in the opposite. We think, oh, my life is so hard, all these problems, and God's forgotten about me. Whereas it's actually really it's the opposite. So it's exactly when things are so difficult that God is much closer to us and with us. And so that's why Elder Joseph, who is the elder at Vatopedi Monastery for many years, who is also the spirit child of Saint Joseph of Hesychast, this Elder Joseph said the reason why temptations are called, that word is used is because they give us experience. Because the word temptation in Greek is pirasmi, and the word for experience is pira. So it's just like the beginning of it. And so what these temptations that they give us experience, they give us also more humility. And when they give us more, and when we have humility and we see our weakness and how it's so easy to fall and give in to temptations, well, then that's when we can be humble, and then that's when God can be with us, and that's when God can send us His grace. Because there's a saying, God can save us sinners, but He can't save the saints we pretend to be. Mm-hmm. So when we think we're all holy and we're all on the right track and everything, well, then God can't get through to us because it's our ego that are thinking that, oh, I'm all set.
Father?
Excuse me, Father?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I didn't know if you meant me or... Go ahead.
Oh, well, you can go first, Tim, and then I'll get Flora afterwards.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, pirasmi, temptation. Am I right in thinking it can mean either sense of temptation, like an inducement to sin, or a trial, like a hardship? It seems the fathers use the same word for both types of challenges.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. So a trial, it also, that would be another good translation of the word pirasmos. Yeah.
Okie doke, because okay, so it could be a trial or it could be an inducement to sin.
Yeah.
Okie doke, thank you.
Yeah, okay. And Flora, what are you going to say?
Father, under what circumstances would God abandon someone?
Yeah, so this is a scary thing for God to give up on us. But basically, what it is if God has given us every kind of opportunity to get closer to Him, and we just consistently reject Him and refuse to follow our conscience, refuse to follow His commandments, and then it'll be then God says, okay, well, this person doesn't want salvation. He's just not interested in salvation. And so this is when a person will just be given up to. And so remember how in the parable of Lazarus and the rich man, that when the rich man was in hell, Abraham told him, remember how you received your good things in that life, and now you're suffering here. So in other words, it's like people have a limited amount of good to receive either in this life or in the next life. And maybe there's an interesting story about how God gave up on someone in recent time in Mount Athos, actually. So this was perhaps you heard about about Saint Ephrem of Katunakia. So Saint Ephrem of Katunakia, he passed away around 30 years ago, and his elder his spiritual father was Saint Joseph of Hesychast, but his elder, who was the person living with him, who was in charge of what his daily tasks were, was Father Nikifor. So I tell you about this last time, how anyway. So one day Saint Ephrem, because he was so close to God, he would have all kinds of revelations and visions and hear voices from his angel or God. And one day he heard a voice saying, "Your elder just died." And so, did I tell you this already? Yeah, I think. Oh, anyway, I'll tell you. Some of you didn't hear. So Saint Ephrem was like, "Oh no, what's wrong with my elder?" So he runs into the other room to see if his elder had a heart attack or something. And his elder just sitting there, just doing what he's doing. And Saint Ephrem was like, "Excuse me, Yanda, are you okay?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask?" He's like, "Oh, never mind, nothing." So, but then, what ended up happening was Saint Ephrem realized that at this point his elder had died spiritually. In other words, his elder because his elder was living such an unmonastic and really unchristian life, even though he was on Mount Athos, that God at this point just gave up on him, and he was basically dead spiritually. But at least it did turn out for the best for this father Nikiforov, because he had, of course, his disciple in it being Saint Ephrem of Katanakia, who was a great saint, and Saint Ephrem had so much love for his elder. He did 40-day liturgies for others. He did that's 1,600 liturgies for his elder, and because of all his intense prayer, he was able to actually bring his elder out of hell.
Wow.
That is something that can happen. That if we're insistent on not repenting, well, then God will say, okay, fine, have it your way.
That's really kind of scary if somebody at Mount Athos can't get saved,
Yeah.
The rest of us, boy, we were.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's just that, because people go to Mount Athos for all kinds of reasons. I mean, some go even just for very non-spiritual reasons. People can go, but but also for fishing, but also people can go there, and of course there's a lot of battles. I mean, there's no guarantee of salvation. Just because you're in a monastery doesn't mean you're guaranteed salvation. Of course, the atmosphere is more conducive to someone who wants to pray and work spiritually, but it's no guarantee. And so, and in fact, even more scary thing that I'm reminded of happened once. Some elder had a vision. It was about maybe 80 years ago or something, and he was at Xiropotamu Monastery, which is one of the monasteries in Mount Athos, and an angel came and said to him, "What's wrong with you guys? I haven't." It was an angel. It said, "I haven't been able to take a soul up to heaven from here for decades."
Oh.
Yeah. Well, of course, this was in a time when Mount Athos was in a real decline. In the early 1900s, there was the monasteries. I mean, it was a very difficult time for Mount Athos, and so but I mean, it can happen. I mean, and if you read, there's some other even more scary stories. There's this one story. There's this. It's just an incredible. I hope they translate it into English some point. It's about a Saint Servios. Servios is the name in Greek. And it's just a little pamphlet I came over, and Saint Joseph of Hesychast also referred to this once, where there's a monastery of Saint Servios. Saint Servios built the monastery, but then after he passed away, then the monastery was still there for many centuries or whatever it was. And at one point, the monks there started getting very, very negligent, and there was, God sent them an angel in disguise as a deacon, and to go there and sort of encourage them to live a little more spiritually. And so when this deacon, who was really an angel, the abbot said, "Okay, yeah, sure, you can serve with us." And so the angel served, and all the monks were astonished to see how pious this deacon was serving, because he was really an angel, and he was just with so much fear of God, and he couldn't. And when the holy gifts were consecrated, he was just like, I can't look. It's just like too powerful and bright to see it. But the monks didn't get it, and so they weren't helped by this visiting angel, this visiting deacon who was really an angel, and so he left. And the angel warned him, if you guys don't repent and start living your spiritual life the way you should, you're going to really suffer. And so, but they were like, who is this deacon? So then what happened was, some visitors came to some pilgrims came to the monastery, but these pilgrims were actually demons in disguise as pilgrims. And so the demons came, and one of the things that monks were doing in this monastery, they're eating meat, and they're just sort of living it up and having which is like a really, especially in those days. I mean, to eating meat, that's like only the rich people. So they were like living in luxury, basically. Anyway, and these pilgrims came that were really demons, and the monks came and greeted them, and then this demon pilgrims asked to be taken to the church, and so they took them. The monks took them to the church, and then once they were in the church, these demon pilgrims got pulled out some rope and tied up the monks all to a column in the middle of the church. And at first the monks were like saying, what kind of weird joke is this, you guys? What is this, some sort of game or something? You guys, what is this? But then these demon pilgrims started. Well, they were demons. I shouldn't call them pilgrims. but then the demons, they started gathering all the sedia, the wooden stalls, all the wooden things in the church, making a big pile right next to where these monks were. And then the monks realized, wait a second, this is like very wrong here. And then the demons lit all this wood on fire and just burned down the whole church and killed those people. And the way it says it, and like the demons cooked them like a lamb on a spit, like just like cooked them on both sides. And yeah, so it's really a gruesome end. And so where was I going with this? Oh yeah, so I mean, yeah, so there can be bad monks. I mean, there's no guarantee that monks or nuns are going to be good.
So did God let the demons, like, because in the other things like St. Anthony's stories and the other stories, the demons are not allowed to hurt people.
Yeah.
So that he allowed it because of their behavior. Is that it?
Yeah. So this is a teaching of Saint Athanasius the Great, and who wrote the life of Saint Anthony. And that's another excellent book that we definitely should all read. It's perhaps the classic, one of the first lives of the saints that was ever written. It was about Saint Anthony. It was written by Saint Athanasius the Great, and in it Saint Athanasius talks about all the demonic temptations that Saint Anthony had, and it shows that even though the demons made Saint Anthony's life very miserable in some ways, they tortured him, beat him up, and everything. But still, they only had the ability to harm him in ways that God would allow. And this is a very important thing to realize, that the demons can't do more bad to us than God allows, because if God just gave the demons free reign to do as much harm as they wanted, they would just completely destroy us. They wouldn't even hesitate. They'd just immediately destroy us and torture us to death and everything. But the demons don't have that kind of permission. So that's why I saw, for example, in some of the Holy Fathers, when they would be attacked by a demon, the saint would say to the demon, well, if you have authority from God to do me harm, go ahead. But if you don't, get out of here. And because they knew that, and because a lot of times the demons, they don't have authority from God to actually harm us, but they do have the ability to scare us. They're saying like, I'm gonna get you. But it's much more scary than my caricature of it. But that's the kind of thing they do. So yeah, so in general, the demons don't have power to harm us, which is why Saint Athanasius emphasized that we don't need to fear the demons. We need to only fear God. We need to fear being away from God and being away from God's grace. That is what's protecting us. Yes, go ahead, Irini.
How does one know if some of the sufferings are coming from the evils?
Yeah, so talking to the microphone. Yes.
How does one know if some of the sufferings are coming from the demon's evil side or it's coming from God, so you get closer to him? How do you know?
Yeah, and the truth is it can be both. I mean, the temptations and the trials we have, they can be, it can be something that the demons are creating, but it could be something that God is allowing these demons to create this, because God, who sees the future and sees how we'll react, he knows that very of temptation. So the key really is, so it's not really important for us to ask, is this temptation from God or is from the demons? The better question to ask ourselves is how does God hope I'll deal with this temptation? What is God hoping I'm going to learn from this temptation?
And can
Yeah,
I
yeah.
ask, so you mentioned about the rich man and the poor man that died, and how
Yeah,
God told them you had a good life,
yeah.
and you said there's it seems like there's some kind of a certain amount of goodness for
Yeah.
allowed in this life and next life.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So this is something that we see many times in the lives of the saints and in their commentaries in the Gospels and things, how they say that, God that is just. And so one thing that the Holy Fathers say, that they say God doesn't torment a person twice. In other words, if someone has gone through torment in this life, then like Lazarus in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, then God won't let him go through torment again in the next life. So, and on the flip side also, if you had a beautiful, easy, comfortable life all your life, and you haven't had any challenges or difficulties, well, it's as if you've sort of used up your blessings, and then it'll be harder for you to get even more blessings in paradise in the next life.
So is that why the monastics just give up everything to make their life more difficult?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason that they see that. I mean, I would say it's a combination of bearing in mind that in the next life, there'll be more, because more blessings if we had less in this life, but also in general, the Holy Father saw that it's the difficulties in this life that really make us more on track and more alert and more on our toes. And as Avagris just said, take away temptations and no one is being saved. They had this very strong sense that these trials or these temptations are actually the things that help us. It's sort of like, yeah. So and I think it's very much like this idea of not of unspoiling yourself, because we all know how if a person is spoiled, especially a child is spoiled, they'll grow up to be a monster, kind of, and the same, but the same thing still can happen to adults. If an adult is spoiled, if you have everything you want and whenever you want and how, and then we can also get spoiled, and that also turns us into bad people. And so, but the converse of that is also true. It's people who have gone through a lot of difficulties in life. Their character is really forged into something beautiful. And this one we see also in general, even in a more broad way, in like entire nations, for example. Like if you take a look at any Orthodox country that has gone through all kinds of persecution, like for example, let's say Serbia, for example, in recent year, or like Georgia, the country of Georgia, and Romania, and all the Russian or all the Slavic countries gone through a lot of communism. It's really, and even Greece in the previous centuries, it really had a very profound effect on the people's outlook in life, and it made them much more spiritual and much closer to God. And so yeah, so there is a lot to be said for difficulties and hard times, even though no one would voluntarily sign up for it. Yes.
One more question.
Sure.
You said you will get possibly more blessings later in life, like after, but isn't heaven heaven? So what does that mean, more blessings?
What do you mean?
You said you might have a limited amount of blessings.
Yeah.
Right. So if you have less on the earthly side, then you'll get more.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So one of the things that the Holy Father say about heaven, that how Christ said there are many mansions in my Father's house, and what the Holy Father say about this is that in heaven it's not just one big place where everyone's in the same amount of glory and everything, but there are different levels. In fact, even St. Paul says, I made it to the third heaven. And so if there's the third heaven, that means also there's a second one and a first one. And then there are different levels in heaven. And the same thing also applies to hell. There are different levels of, some places are really bad, some are just medium bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I was, not to interrupt,
Yeah,
but
go
I
ahead.
was reading something, and I think it was Ayos Paisios that said it, that
Yeah.
he said something along the lines, and I'm not even gonna do justice to what I'm about to say, but he said that when the time comes of that Parousia, it's dependent on each person, how much force you're able to see.
How much light?
Yeah, something along the lines of that. And then he went in to discuss like that it's not just one place, but like how you say it's like levels. Like the more fuss, the more like glory.
Yeah.
The less fuss, not as much glory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you guys see that online? Yeah. Okay.
And Saint Euphemia, when she came to Saint Paisios,
Yeah.
didn't she tell him that if she had known how much glory she
Oh,
would
yeah.
get, that she would suffer gladly even more?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. So there are levels of lowest, well, yeah, one of the lowest levels in heaven is for babies that were never baptized, and because so because in the 4th century there was a synod. They're discussing the question. These saints of the church were discussing, what happens if a baby dies before he's baptized, or if it's an aborted baby or a miscarried baby. Does this person go to heaven? Because it's pretty clear. Christ says, in order to go to heaven, you have to be baptized. And so they discussed it and prayed about it, and they reached the conclusion that in a sense this baby who died is in a sense baptized in his own blood, and so they are kind of worthy of heaven because they're sinless. They haven't had a chance to do any sins, but in heaven it's as if they're blind. In other words, they're experiencing the bliss of paradise with the rest of their senses. In other words, the intense fragrance, the warmth, they're hearing the beautiful sounds there, and they're feeling God's presence, but they just can't see anything. So this is sort of one of the lower levels of paradise, where it's still infinite bliss, but there are different kinds of infinity. That's something. Well, my brother, my brother's a math professor. He'd say, there's more than one kind of infinity. There's alpha 0 and alpha 1. And he explained anyway. But it's kind of neat though, that there are different kinds of infinity, just as there are different kinds of infinite bliss in paradise.
So let me ask Father, this has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Well, why is this so why is this not like these discussions that we're having, and maybe some of this is new? Like I just learned about like what Ayopaicio said within the last few years.
Yeah.
Like, why does the church not like share this with people?
Yeah. So yeah, and I don't know. I mean, I guess yeah. So yeah, I that's a tough question. I mean, I'm sure there. I mean, I guess that it's when we say the church, it's such a broad term that it's not really fair to say that the church as a whole isn't doing this. I would say that there are different parts in a sense of the church. Let's say there's the the North America part of the Orthodox Church, and then within that very broad thing, there are people who are priests, let's say, and who have a minimal spiritual education. Who, let's say, they've gone to seminary, they've done all the courses, but they might not have been exposed very much to the teachings of the saints. They might not have read many of what Saint Paisius said, and so when they go out and then they give their sermons or teach their parishioners, they themselves might not even know that, oh yeah, there are these teachings about paradise, whatever. So yeah, and I think this is also why it's so very, very important for us to really go to the source of Orthodox tradition and not just depend on whatever sermon we might hear every Sunday, but really go to listen to the saints and see what have the saints had to say about these things. And the easiest way, of course, to hear what the saints have had to say is to just open up their book. We have their writings, and we have, and also their example. And so we have their life stories. And so these are things that can be very inspiring and also educational. So, yeah.
I have a twofold question about about the levels of heaven. So if you're in heaven and there's different levels, like, does that mean that, like, obviously you don't know if other family members haven't made it or anything like that, because then it wouldn't be heaven, right? But like, let's say, the saints are obviously at the highest level, and let's say like somebody, is like at that holy level, and then you're stuck at level 1 because you're terrible. Like, do you never see that person then in heaven? And then like number 2, to that point, then how does that fit into the final, like, when we are all brought back into our bodies, then does the levels cease to exist, and then we can like see the saints and see these holy people even when we're like, if we're like the bottom rung?
Yeah. So that's a tough question, and I'm not sure if we know the answer. I know that, I mean, there are, for example, I mean, there have been visions of people going to having a foretaste of heaven, seeing heaven, and like there's one incident specifically with Saint Anthony the Great, where one of the desert fathers is given a vision of heaven. He sees all the great desert fathers, but then he says, "Hey, but wait, where's Anthony? Didn't he make it? I thought he would have been here for sure." And then his angel, who took him up there to heaven to see it, said, "Oh, he's not here. He's up close to where God is. He's so yeah. So there is this sense that perhaps that we're not able to see, or maybe we see them from far away or something. It is a little bit of a mystery, and I'm not sure if anyone does know the answer to that.
But there is ability to work up, right?
Yeah. And so what the Holy Fathers say is that there is a constant progression. I mean, we're not static in heaven. We're not just sitting there, just, well, okay, now what do we do? But there is a constant progression and deepening our connection with God, and deepening our knowledge. And so it's a very, I guess, I mean, I'm tempted to use the word exciting time. It's not boring at all.
Papa Ephraim?
But then,
Yes, Vasiliki, yes.
Yeah, because we're on the subject, I heard something about, I don't know if it was Ayos Iacobos or something. He was
Yes.
explaining how if somebody's at a higher level, they can come down and visit you.
Yes. Oh, yes, that's right. Yes. Yes, and that is something that does happen. And so we see that many times the Panagia would come down either to a lower part of heaven or to earth itself, and the same thing with all the saints. So that does. Yeah, thank you for the reminder, Vasiliki. Yeah, so we would get to see them, just maybe not all the time.
what about then the when we're put back in our bodies at the final resurrection?
Oh, after the second coming, after the final resurrection. Yeah, and so I don't know if there's a teaching of the fathers of exactly how things are going to be in that time after the final, the final judgment. Vasiliki, do you have your hand raised there? Yeah, did you want to say something? Yeah,
I was
go
just
ahead.
No,
gonna ask-
no,
yeah, I think-
Father, I don't. Oh, I'm sorry, another Vasily.
There's two Vasiliki here.
Sorry, thank you, Father. I think you kind of answered it. I was pondering that question the other night when I was reading some of the books, but do we, if we make it into heaven, will we at least be able to see God at least once, even if we're not close to them? And I understanding there's different levels, but would we ever at least see them once to know?
Yeah, so the understanding I have from all these revelations of the saints about paradise is that everyone will see God, and in fact, this is what it says in the Book of Revelation. It says it talks about in the very end of the Book of Revelation, which is definitely something you guys should read if you haven't already read. But it talks about how there'll be the sun that's never setting, and it won't be necessary for people to say, "Oh, you got to know about God," because everyone will know God. So it's this sense where God is the sun there in this afterlife, after the second coming, and everyone is seeing the sun, and everyone's affected and knows God, the Son of Righteousness, as it's called. but the degree to which we see him will depend on our own purity and our own closeness, our own holiness. And so how much we'll see him is different from how other people would see him. Yeah. Yeah. In fact, this is a little bit similar, but not quite the same thing. But there's an interesting story about a monk who was praying very intensely. He really, really, really wanted to see the Panagia. And this monk was a very holy man. And so God sent him an angel and said, okay, tonight in your prayer, you'll get to see the Panagia. But I'm warning you that it'll be so intense that when you see the Panagia, that with any eyes, if you have one ear, with either eye you have open, if you have both of them or just one of them open, that eye will just go blind because of the intensity of this vision. And the monk is like, okay, okay, thanks, okay. So the monk is thinking, oh, okay, so I got it. Okay, I'll close one eye, and I'll just see it with one eye, and that way, after the vision's over, I won't be completely blind. I can still function in this world. So sure enough, Panagia does appear to him, and he sees her with one eye, but it's just so intense and she's just so incredibly beautiful, and he's so moved by it that he can't resist. He just takes his hand, his other hand, and so then he just sees it. He's like, oh, but then the poor guy does get blind after that. But it does actually have a happy ending, because the next, so he is blind for, I think it was a day or a week or something. But then afterwards, the Panagia comes back to him and says, well, because you have so much love and reverence for me that you wanted to see me with both eyes here, I've given you your vision back. So yeah, so there are different levels, at least, of being able to see God's.
But I'm sorry, Father.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who was the source for that wonderful story about how just blindingly magnificent the Theotokos is? Do you remember?
Yeah,
Did you say?
I'm pretty sure this is in a book in Greek called Amartolon Soteria. It's called The Salvation of Sinners. It was published maybe in the 16 or 1700s, maybe around the 17th century in Greece, and it was a real classic. Something that actually Father Chrysostomos Nikodimos and Neopatopedi, he's actually translating. He might have actually finished. I'm not sure. He's working. So it's something maybe we'll have pretty soon.
Oh, cool. Okay. Then I just had one other quickie here, if I may.
Sure.
Well, in terms of seeing God in the age to come, this is a wonderful line from the scriptures, right in the Bible itself, the letter of 1 John, which is great to read. It's only 5 chapters, but chapter 3, verse 2 says, "Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not appeared as yet what we will be. We know that when he appears, we shall be like him, because we will see him just as he is."
Yes.
So the scriptures promise a vision of God, at least for those who are saved.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very bold thing. I mean, to be able to say, yeah, we shall see God as he is. And it's because, I mean, that's the Holy Fathers say that there's with God there's both essence and energies, and they teach that no one can know God's essence, but we can see his energies or his activities, what his effects are. So we can see. So there is part of God we can know and see, but there's always going to be something beyond our grasp and beyond our knowledge, which is actually kind of a good thing, because if you think about it, if we were able to fit God in a sense inside our brain and our mind and our experience, then that would mean that we are the ones encompassing God, and we're sort of in a sense greater than God. So it does actually make sense that we're not able to fully grasp God.
Yeah.
Okay. So shall we move on?
Sure.
Hey, but this is good. I'm glad we're so. Yeah, so okay, back on page 105 here. There's number 7 here. And so Evagrius, the priest who said to this Evagrius, who came from very, illustrious, he was a very, intelligent, experienced, and wise man. He said to him, if you were in your homeland, you would have probably been a bishop and the head of many clergy. But now you are living here as a foreigner, as an alien. And it says Evagrius was pricked in conscience, but not disturbed. Nodding his head, he said to him, "It is true, Father. Nevertheless, I have spoken once. I will add nothing the second time." So this is a very cryptic passage here. I'm not clear myself what he's trying to say, but I'm guessing what at least why he was pricked in conscience is perhaps Evagrius had the sense that he had a more lofty calling in order to be a bishop, but for whatever reason he ended up not going that route and doing something more lowly, and perhaps he had regret that I perhaps God's primary will for my life was to become a bishop and to do something much more challenging and difficult, but I chose this path, which is a little bit easier in some ways. But yeah, this is just my stab at it. I mean, it's really hard to guess what it is he's talking about. Okay, now now this Evagrius S1 here, that it says Evagrius says the beginning of salvation is to have a low opinion of oneself. And so how do you see that? Does that make sense to you guys?
Mhm.
Yeah, because it really is. Humility is the key in our whole spiritual life. I always was very moved by something that St. Paisius said. He says that God wants so much to give all of us all the gifts of the Holy Spirit, just fill us with his grace, but he knows he can't do that to us, because if he does, we'd immediately get prideful and then lose it all and be worse than Lucifer, who is prideful for his yeah. So St. Pius says we're putting God in a difficult position because we're not letting him give us all the blessings he wants to give us.
Mm.
And there is an interesting corollary to this about this having a low opinion of oneself. And I forgive if I'm repeating myself, but there is something interesting that C.S. Lewis once said. And of course, C.S. Lewis, he wasn't Orthodox, but almost everything he had to say was very Orthodox and in line with the Holy Fathers. And so this one thing he did say is that, in his opinion, humility is not thinking less. It's not thinking of oneself less. It's not thinking less of oneself. There's thinking humble thoughts, but humility is thinking of oneself less. There's not spending so much time thinking about yourself. And so I don't know. What are your take? What's your take? Do you get the difference between the two? Yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's got to be right, I think.
Well, you say it too. Yeah, but yeah. So yeah, because I mean, I would say, well, of course, both aspects both things are indicative of humility, because a humble person definitely does have a lower opinion of himself, but a humble person also is not thinking about himself all the time. He's not so self-centered. He's very much thinking about God and thinking about how he can care for his neighbor. And so yeah, so I'd say they're both good. They're both very powerful
Amen.
aspects. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay. Now here's this next one is interesting. I myself pleasures in order to exclude occasions of anger, for I am aware that anger is always on the attack concerning pleasures, troubling my mind and hunting down my awareness. So I think what he's trying to say here is that it's our desire, our attachment to pleasures that can be a problem for us if we don't get that pleasure. So, I come to a book club and there's no pizza. I'm like, hey, pizza. And then as this elder did, I'm acquiring this habit of denying myself pizza and whatever else is that gives me pleasure. Well, then I can be okay when I'm not getting it. And so I think this is a very important lesson in life in general. There's one very important key to being at peace is to train ourselves to have low expectations, because if we can prepare ourselves for the worst and be ready for not just no pizza at book club, but just in any kind of difficulty we might face during the day, then when these things do hit us, we'll be like, okay, I'm okay with this. That's okay. I expected this much. In other words, for example, you let's say you're going to some place and you're thinking, well, maybe they'll treat me with all kinds of respect and honor, or maybe they'll ignore me. Well, I think I deserve to be ignored, so I'll just go in with that mindset. And then they end up ignoring you, well, then you're fine. Whereas if you go in with the mindset of, oh, they're going to really roll out the royal carpet for me and give me a warm welcome, and then no one does, you're like, hey, and then you get angry or whatever trouble. So yeah, so that is a key of how we can always lower our expectations in order to have peace. Yeah. So maybe we'll just go a little bit more. Okay. Oh, and then and at the bottom 105 of them on here, this he said the reason why he said he didn't want to have a young man coming to the skeet is because he said, I will not let a woman's face stay at skeet because of the battle with the enemy. And so the idea is that in those days, all men had beards. No one would shave their beard off. And so all men would have facial hair. It's only someone who's, of course, very, very young who would not have a beard yet. And so, but for these monks, and if they saw someone without facial hair, they would be reminded of a woman. And so they didn't want to have any temptations being reminded of a woman. Yeah. So they wouldn't let these unbearded people come to the monastery. And there's actually something that's been even up until very recent times. They're even official, part of the Typicon of Mount Athos that says no one without a beard can become a novice, because they didn't want anybody to be reminded of women, because it was that strict out there in Mount Athos, where of course there's no women involved allowed. Yeah, so that's.
Could I say something there?
Sure.
Since you mentioned C.S. Lewis, he actually touches on that in passing. Are people familiar with his work called The Screwtape Letters?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like a senior demon writing to a lesser demon and coaching him on how to get souls damned. It's brilliant. But it's sort of everything's backhanded. Like when he refers to the enemy, that means God. But anyway, he just in passing once says, we've made some progress confusing the distinction between men and women by getting the men to shave off their beards. And I'm not taking a stand. I don't always let my beard grow. Sometimes I shave, sometimes I don't. But it's just interesting that Lewis, just in passing, made it a little demonic win in their battle to confuse the distinction between men and women.
Yeah, and Saint Cosmas of Etolos, he was also when in the late 1700s, when he went around what was to become Greece, it was the Ottoman Empire at the time. He was preaching. One thing he did say is, if you ever have to give a seat of honor to someone, and in your group there's an old man and who doesn't have a beard and a young man who does have a beard, give the seat of honor to the young man with the beard, not the old man, which for them we'd be like, what? But he's old, he should be respected and honored. But he's no, the person with the young, if he has a beard, he's the one who should be honored. In fact, he even would give out free comb. He would go around with hundreds of wooden combs and hand them out for free to anyone who would promise to let their beard grow. So yeah, so there definitely is something to be said for beards. Of course, I might be a little biased here. But you don't have to get this long. I'm just saying. Yeah. Okay. Oh, Flora, did you have your hand raised? I just noticed. Yeah. Is that all left over from before? Oh, I guess not. Okay. So anyway, so maybe we'll just stop here then. So it is time. And I wanted to say that the next 2 weeks I'm going to be in Alaska. So, but I'm going to still do the book club on Zoom. So if any of you aren't on my mailing list who are here in the room with me, right, make sure you give me your email so I add you to the mailing so you can get onto the Zoom version for the next. So at least 2 weeks, then I'll be back here. Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Through the prayers of our Holy Fathers, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us. Oh, and I forgot to say, so we should read another. So we got finished page 105. So maybe we should finish. Oh well, maybe we could read another 5. So I told you guys to read up to 115. Maybe we can read another 5 pages. Read up to page 120. So for next week, okay?
Thank you, Father.
Okay.
Thank you, Father. Safe
right.
travels.
Thank you.
Be safe.
Thank
Yeah,
you all.
καλό ταξίδι.
I mean,
I mean,
all right, I'll turn off the recording now.
ευλογείτε.